My name is Charlotte Wilson, 62 years old, and I never thought my son would betray his father's legacy. When Thomas died 2 years ago, he left our software company to Craig, believing he would honor 35 years of hard work. Instead, our son decided to sell it to line his pockets. The look of contempt on Craig's face when he told me I was a burden and to figure out how to pay rent still haunts me. What he didn't know was that Thomas and I had planned for this possibility. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe if you want to see how a mother's quiet wisdom can teach an entitled son that true wealth isn't just money in the bank. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as I sipped my coffee, gazing out at the Boston skyline. From this view in my downtown apartment, I could see the gleaming tower where Innotech Solutions occupied the top 3 floors. The company Thomas and I built from nothing over 3.5 decades. The legacy we created through countless late nights, sacrifices, and unwavering determination. Thomas had been gone for 2 years now. The stroke took him suddenly at 65, far too young, leaving behind a void nothing could fill. We'd been married for 40 years, meeting as computer science students at MIT in the late 1970s, when women in tech were rare exceptions. Thomas saw me as an equal from day one, never questioning my abilities, despite the rampant sexism of the era. Together, we dreamed of creating security software that would protect businesses in the emerging digital age. Everyone focuses on building, but who's protecting what's built? Thomas would say. That insight became our guiding principle when we founded Innotech Solutions in 1987, working out of our garage with secondhand equipment and boundless ambition. The early years were lean. I still remember eating ramen noodles for weeks straight so we could make payroll for our first 2 employees. Thomas handling the coding while I managed client relationships and business strategy. We took turns caring for Craig when he came along in 1986, often bringing our infant son to client meetings when we couldn't find childcare. I smiled at the memory of tiny Craig sleeping in a portable crib beside our demonstration table during our first major pitch to a financial institution. The executives found it endearing rather than unprofessional, and we landed the contract that put Innotech on the map. Craig grew up alongside our company. By the time he was in high school, Innotech had expanded to over 100 employees and moved into its first dedicated office building. By his college graduation, we were an industry leader in cybersecurity solutions with clients across North America and Europe. Unlike Thomas and me, Craig never knew struggle. We provided him with every advantage: private schools, summer programs at prestigious tech camps, internships at partner companies, and eventually an Ivy League education. We wanted to give him everything we didn't have growing up. Perhaps that was our mistake. I took another sip of coffee, wincing at the bitterness. The Craig who returned from business school was different from the curious, kind boy we raised. He came back with an MBA, a sense of entitlement, and Melissa, a woman whose ambitions seemed focused entirely on social status and material wealth. Mom business isn't about products anymore. It's about perception. Craig told me shortly after Thomas made him director of business development. Dad's approach is old school. We need to be more aggressive, more visible. Thomas listened patiently to Craig's ideas, implementing some while gently steering him away from others that contradicted our company values. The balance worked, more or less, until Thomas's stroke. The funeral was a blur of faces and condolences. I remember Craig standing stoically beside me, Melissa checking her phone during the eulogy, and the weight of Thomas's absence crushing me like a physical force. What I recall most clearly, though, was the reading of the will 1 week later. Thomas had structured his succession plan meticulously. Craig would receive 75% of Inotech's shares and the CEO position. I would retain 20%, officially retiring, but maintaining a seat on the board. The remaining 5% would be distributed among long-term employees who had been with us since the beginning. Thomas had explained this plan to me years earlier, and I agreed it was fair. Craig had worked in the company for 15 years by then and deserved the opportunity to lead. What Craig didn't know was that Thomas had added special provisions in the corporate bylaws, provisions that would only become relevant if certain lines were crossed. Thomas knew our son better than Craig realized. Within 6 months of taking control, Craig replaced half the executive team with his business school connections. People who had helped build Inotech from its foundation were pushed aside for younger, more aggressive leaders who talked about disruption and growth hacking, but knew little about cybersecurity or our company culture. I tried to advise Craig to explain the importance of institutional knowledge and client relationships built over decades. "Times are changing, Mom," he would say dismissively. "We need fresh perspectives." Sophia Martinez, our CFO and my closest friend at the company, managed to keep her position, though Craig reduced her authority. She would meet me for lunch every few weeks, keeping me informed of changes I wasn't supposed to know about. "He's turning everything upside down, Charlotte," Sophia told me over salads at our favorite cafe. "The new marketing team is making promises our engineers can't keep. 3 major clients have already expressed concerns." I nodded, unsurprised, but saddened. "And the innovation pipeline Thomas was so proud of," Sophia sighed. "Shelved. Craig says it's not profitable enough in the short term." The innovation pipeline had been Thomas's passion project, a program dedicating 15% of company resources to developing new security solutions that might not be immediately profitable, but would position Inotech at the cutting edge. It had produced our most successful products over the years. Craig and Melissa bought a mansion in the exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, far beyond what a reasonable CEO salary could support. They began appearing in society pages and hosted lavish parties for Boston's elite. Meanwhile, the company's profit margins thinned as Craig implemented aggressive expansion strategies without the infrastructure to support them. I watched from a distance, technically retired, but still connected to the company through my board position and the relationships I'd maintained with key clients. Thomas had insisted I keep those connections active even as I stepped back from daily operations. "Your value to Inotech isn't just what you do, Charlotte," he had told me. "It's who you are to our clients and employees. Don't let anyone push you completely aside." I heeded his advice, maintaining regular lunches with our top clients under the guise of social visits. They trusted me, confided in me, and often asked why certain changes were happening at Inotech. I reassured them while making mental notes of their concerns. My apartment was technically company property, a perk Thomas had arranged years ago when we decided to downsize from our suburban home. The building was an Inotech investment, and my unit was designated as a company asset for housing executives or important clients. Craig had grudgingly allowed me to continue living there after Thomas passed, though he occasionally made comments about the arrangement being temporary. I was contemplating this precarious living situation when my phone rang. Sophia's name flashed on the screen. "Charlotte." Her voice was tense, hushed. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you meet me at the usual place in 30 minutes? The urgency in her tone alarmed me. "Of course. Is everything okay?" "No," she replied simply. "Everything is not okay." I grabbed my purse and headed out, unaware that my world was about to be turned upside down for the second time in 2 years. Sophia was already seated at our corner table when I arrived at Café Laurent, a small French bistro tucked away on a side street far from the Innotech offices. She looked uncharacteristically disheveled, her usually immaculate gray bob slightly askew, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents spread across the table. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gathering the papers as I sat down. "I shouldn't even be showing you these, but after everything you and Thomas did for me over the years, I couldn't keep this from you." "What's going on, Sophia?" I asked, concern mounting at her unusual behavior. She slid a folder toward me, glancing around to ensure no one was watching. "Craig is selling Innotech, the whole company. He's in final negotiations with Globetech." The news hit me like a physical blow. Globetech was a multinational conglomerate known for acquiring promising tech companies, stripping them for parts, and discarding what didn't fit their portfolio. "That can't be right," I said, opening the folder to find confidential financial projections and sale valuations. "The board would have to approve such a move. I'm on the board, and this is the first I'm hearing of it." Sophia's expression was grim. "He's planning to present it as a fait accompli at next month's board meeting." These documents were prepared for a private presentation to Globetech executives yesterday. My assistant accidentally received the files when she was copied on an email meant for their financial team. I scanned the documents, my heart sinking as I absorbed the details. The valuation was well below market rate. The terms heavily favored Globetech, and there were no provisions to protect Innotech's employees or intellectual property. "This is a fire sale, not a proper acquisition," I murmured, turning pages with increasing dismay. Why would Craig agree to these terms? The company is worth at least twice this amount. Sophia lowered her voice further. "That's the other thing. Craig needs cash, and quickly. He's made some very poor investment decisions over the past year. Personal investments using company resources." "What kind of investments?" "Cryptocurrency, mainly. High-risk ventures that Thomas would never have approved. He lost millions, Charlotte." I closed my eyes briefly, imagining Thomas's reaction to such recklessness with the company he built through decades of careful ethical growth. "There's more," Sophia continued. "Part of the deal includes a 3-year employment contract for Craig with Globetech at an astronomical salary plus stock options. Melissa has been telling everyone they're buying property in the Hamptons and Milan once the deal closes." The pieces began falling into place. Craig wasn't just selling the company. He was selling out everything Thomas and I had built in exchange for personal gain. "What about the employees?" I asked, thinking of the dozens of people who had been with us for decades. Globetech has a history of mass layoffs after acquisitions. Their standard playbook is to keep about 20% of the technical staff and eliminate everyone else. I thought of Robert in engineering, who had worked nights for months to complete our first major product. Maria in customer support, who knew every client by name. Jamal in research, whose innovations had earned Innotech multiple patents. And our clients, their data security. Sophia shook her head. "The contract has minimal transition support. Most will likely be moved to Globetech's standard security package, which is," she hesitated, "less robust than our solutions." My initial shock was transforming into something else: determination. Thomas and I had not spent our lives building this company to see it dismantled for our son's personal gain. Does anyone else know about this? I asked. A few executives have heard rumors, but Craig has kept the details tightly controlled. He told the leadership team that he's exploring strategic partnerships, but nothing more specific. When is this deal supposed to close? Next Friday. They're rushing it through before the quarterly financials are published. Our numbers aren't as strong as last year, which gives Craig justification for the sale, but they're nowhere near bad enough to warrant these terms. I pulled out my phone and checked my calendar. I need to speak with Craig directly before I decide what to do. Sophia looked worried. Be careful, Charlotte. He's not the same person since Thomas passed. Money and power have changed him, and Melissa's influence has only made it worse. After leaving the cafe, I went directly to the Innotech offices. The receptionist knew since my retirement, didn't recognize me until I showed my board member ID. I'd like to see my son, I said pleasantly. Craig Wilson, the CEO. She checked the system, frowning slightly. Mr. Wilson is in meetings all afternoon. Would you like to schedule an appointment for later this week? Please tell him his mother is here. I'll wait. 20 minutes later, Craig's executive assistant, a young man with a perfectly pressed suit and wary eyes, approached me in the lobby. Mrs. Wilson, I apologize, but Craig is unavailable today. Perhaps I can help with whatever you need. I smiled thinly. What I need is 5 minutes with my son regarding a family matter. Please inform him that it's urgent. The assistant shifted uncomfortably. He specifically asked me to tell you that any board matters should be addressed at the next meeting, and any personal matters should be brought up at Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner was a tradition Thomas had started years ago, a time when family and business remained separate. Using it as a shield now was particularly galling. Fine, I said, rising from my seat. Please tell Craig I'll see him Sunday, and we have much to discuss. As I left the building that had once been my second home, I noticed new signage being installed in the lobby. The Innotech logo, which Thomas and I had designed together in our garage, was being replaced with a more modern version. Another piece of our legacy erased. On the way home, I checked Melissa's Instagram account, something I rarely did. Her latest post showed her trying on expensive sunglasses with the caption, "Milan shopping spree prep, 1 week until La Dolce Vita begins, #blessed, luxury lifestyle, #million-dollar deals." The comments were filled with congratulations and questions about what big news was coming. Melissa had replied to one friend, "Can't say yet, but C just closed the biggest deal of his career. This girl's about to level up." They were already celebrating the destruction of Innotech before the deal was even finalized. My resolve hardened. Back in my apartment, I began researching Globetech's acquisition history. The pattern was clear and devastating. They acquired innovative companies, absorbed their intellectual property and top talent, and discarded the rest. Of their last 12 acquisitions, 11 had effectively ceased to exist within 2 years. I couldn't let that happen to Innotech. Thomas wouldn't have wanted it, and I wouldn't allow it. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by photos of the company's growth over 35 years, I realized what I needed to do. Thomas had always said I was the strategic one, the planner who could see 3 steps ahead, while others focused on immediate gains. It was time to put those skills to use again. I picked up my phone and called Michael Harris, the attorney who had handled our legal affairs for decades and helped Thomas structure his succession plan. "Michael," I said when he answered, "we need to talk about Innotech's corporate bylaws. Tonight, if possible. Those are complex documents, Charlotte. Any particular section you're interested in? Yes, I replied, a plan already forming in my mind. The sections about major asset sales and board approval requirements, the ones Thomas added 5 years ago. Ah, Michael said, understanding immediately. I'll bring the files. Dinner at 7. Perfect, I said. And Michael, this stays between us for now. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and began composing emails to several people. James Reynolds, CEO of SecureSoft, a respected competitor and old friend of Thomas. Robert Chen, our veteran head of engineering, who had been marginalized under Craig's leadership, and several key clients who had expressed concerns about recent changes at Innotech. Each message was carefully worded, revealing nothing explicit about the situation, but setting the stage for what would come next. By the time I finished, a strategy was taking shape, one that Craig, in his arrogance, would never see coming. The Sunday dinner table had never felt so tense. I had prepared Craig's favorite meal, prime rib roasted potatoes and asparagus, the same menu I served when we celebrated his promotion to CEO. The familiar food did nothing to soften the atmosphere as Craig and Melissa arrived 30 minutes late, both dressed as though dinner at his mother's apartment was an inconvenience between more important engagements. Sorry we're late, Melissa said, not sounding sorry at all. She air-kissed my cheek, the cloud of her expensive perfume momentarily overwhelming. Brunch with the Hamiltons ran long. They're considering investing in Craig's next venture. As though Innotech was already in their rearview mirror, Craig poured himself a generous glass of the wine they'd brought, a showy label that Thomas would have considered pretentious without offering any to me. You wanted to talk, Mom, he said, checking his watch. We have dinner reservations at 9, so we can't stay too long. I carefully cut a piece of prime rib, taking my time. I ran into Sophia at lunch the other day. She seemed concerned about some changes at Innotech. Craig's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sophia needs to remember her role is financial management, not company strategy. That's interesting, because company strategy is precisely what we need to discuss. I set down my fork and looked directly at my son. I understand you're planning to sell Innotech to Globetech. The momentary flash of surprise in Craig's eyes confirmed my information was correct. He recovered quickly, leaning back with forced casualness. I'm exploring several strategic opportunities for the company. As CEO, that's my responsibility. And as a board member, it's my responsibility to evaluate such opportunities before they're finalized, I countered. Yet this is the first I'm hearing of it. The board will be fully briefed at the appropriate time, Craig said dismissively. This is a complex transaction that requires confidentiality. Melissa, never one for subtlety, jumped in. It's an amazing deal, Charlotte. Craig's getting us a fantastic price, plus a guaranteed executive position at Globetech. We're celebrating with a 3-week trip to Milan, Lake Como, and the Amalfi Coast. Her eyes gleamed with excitement. We're staying at the Four Seasons in Milan. I've already picked out the suite. I turned to Craig. And what happens to Innotech after this amazing deal, to the people who have dedicated their careers to building it? Business evolves, Mom. Some positions will be redundant after the acquisition. That's just reality. Redundant? I repeated, the coldness of the term hanging in the air. Is that what we're calling loyal employees now? Craig set down his wine glass with unnecessary force. This is exactly why I didn't discuss this with you earlier. You're too emotional about the company. It's a business, not a family. To you, perhaps. To your father, it was both. Dad isn't here anymore, Craig snapped. and his approach to business belongs in the past century. Inotech needs to evolve. By being dismantled and absorbed by Globetech. That's not evolution, Craig. That's extinction. Melissa laughed a sharp, dismissive sound. God, you're so dramatic, Charlotte. Companies get bought and sold every day. It's normal. What's not normal, I replied evenly, is selling a profitable industry-leading company at half its market value without proper board approval. Craig's expression hardened. I have controlling interest, 75% of the shares. I don't actually need your approval. You might want to check the corporate bylaws on that. Your father was very specific about major asset sales. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Craig's face. What are you talking about? Thomas added provisions requiring unanimous board approval for any sale of the company or substantial assets. Your 75% doesn't override that requirement. Craig's face flushed with anger. That's impossible. I would know about such provisions. Would you? When was the last time you reviewed the complete corporate bylaws? Or did you just assume control meant you could do whatever you wanted? Melissa placed a manicured hand on Craig's arm. Honey, is she serious? Can she actually block the sale? Craig shook off her hand, standing abruptly. This is a delay tactic, nothing more. The Globetech deal is happening, Mom. I've already signed the preliminary agreement. Then you've signed something you can't deliver, I said calmly. And I imagine Globetech's legal team will be very interested to learn that. You would sabotage your own son's future out of sentimentality. Craig's voice rose. This deal sets us up for life. We're talking millions properties round the world. Connections to the global elite. And what about the 300 people who work at Inotech, the clients who trust us with their most sensitive data? Your father's legacy. Dad is dead, Craig shouted, slamming his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. And his precious legacy company is failing under the weight of outdated thinking and excessive employee benefits. Globetech is offering a lifeline. Inotech isn't failing, Craig. It's just not growing at the unsustainable rate you promised your investors. His eyes widened. How do you know about my investors? I know more than you think, I said quietly, including about the company funds you've diverted to cover personal investment losses. Melissa gasped, looking at Craig. You said those investments were legal. They were, he hissed. Mom's just trying to scare us. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. I'm trying to protect what your father and I spent our lives building. And you from yourself. Craig laughed bitterly. Protect me. I'm saving this family's financial future while you live in the past. Do you have any idea what I've been dealing with? The market pressures, the competition, the constant demands for innovation. I do, actually, I replied. I ran that company with your father for 30 years before you took over. And now it's my company, Craig snapped. Mine to run or sell as I see fit. Not according to the bylaws. Craig's face contorted with frustration, and something else fear, perhaps, as the reality of his situation began to dawn on him. You know what, I don't need this, he spat. The deal is moving forward. If you try to block it, I'll find a way around you. And by the way, that apartment, you're living in company property. Once the sale goes through, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Melissa smiled smugly. Maybe check the classified ads I hear. There are some nice retirement communities in the suburbs. Craig gathered his coat, Melissa following suit. You're a burden, Mom. Always have been with your outdated ideas and emotional attachment to the company. I sold Dad's company. Good luck paying rent. I looked at my son, Thomas's son, and felt a profound sadness at what he had become. But beneath that sadness was determination. I had anticipated this moment, prepared for it. I smiled calmly. All right, good luck. My response clearly wasn't what Craig expected. He hesitated wrong-footed by my apparent acceptance. That's it. No more arguments. What would be the point? I said with a small shrug. You've made your decision. Melissa tugged at Craig's arm. Come on, we'll be late for our reservation. As they reached the door, I called after them. Enjoy Milan. I hear it's lovely this time of year. Craig turned back, suspicion clouding his features. But Melissa pulled him through the door before he could respond. The moment they left, I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to Michael. It's time. The plan I had been quietly developing over the past week was now in motion. While Craig thought he was making power moves, he had failed to recognize the most fundamental lesson Thomas had tried to teach him. In business, as in chess, you must anticipate your opponent's moves several steps ahead. And I had been planning this particular game for longer than Craig realized. The morning after my disastrous dinner with Craig and Melissa, I arrived at Michael Harris's law office at precisely 8 a.m. His assistant showed me directly to the conference room, where several people were already waiting: Sophia Martinez, James Reynolds from SecureSoft, and Robert Chen, our veteran head of engineering. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I said, setting my briefcase on the table. Michael entered with a stack of legal documents. I've reviewed everything, Charlotte. The bylaws are clear, and Craig has overstepped his authority. I nodded, turning to address the group. For those who don't know the full situation, my son is attempting to sell Innotech to Globetech without proper board approval. The sale would likely result in massive layoffs and the effective dismantling of the company Thomas and I built. Globetech has a notorious reputation, James agreed. They gutted Server Shield last year, 500 jobs gone within 3 months of acquisition. Exactly, I said, which is why we're here. I believe there's a better path forward, one that preserves Innotech's legacy and protects its people. I spent the next hour outlining what I had learned about Craig's dealings, from the unauthorized use of company funds for personal investments to the grossly undervalued terms of the Globetech acquisition. Sophia provided financial documentation showing discrepancies in recent reports, while Robert detailed how product development had stalled under Craig's leadership. The question is, Michael said, after we had reviewed all the evidence, what do you want to do about it, Charlotte? I straightened my shoulders, channeling the business acumen that had helped build Innotech from nothing. I want to save the company, but I need your help. I turned to James Reynolds, who had been quietly taking notes. James, you and Thomas were competitors, but also friends. You understand the value of what we built at Innotech. James nodded. Thomas was a visionary. We competed fiercely, but always with mutual respect. What happened to Innotech in the last 2 years has been painful to watch. Would SecureSoft be interested in acquiring Innotech under terms that would preserve its core strengths and employee base? James leaned forward. We've actually considered approaching you several times, but assumed Craig wouldn't be interested. Our companies have complementary strengths. Your advanced encryption protocols would pair perfectly with our network security infrastructure. And your approach to acquisitions? I asked. We integrate, we don't dismantle, James said firmly. Our last 3 acquisitions have retained over 90% of employees, and we maintain acquired brands as specialized divisions. I smiled. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. For the next several hours, we outlined a counterproposal SecureSoft would offer to acquire Innotech at a fair market valuation significantly higher than Globetech's offer. The deal would include guaranteed employment for at least 2 years for all current employees, continuation of the innovation pipeline Thomas had established, and maintenance of the Innotech brand. "This sounds promising," Sophia said cautiously, "but there's still the issue of Craig's controlling interest. Even with the bylaw requirements, he could make this very difficult." "That's where Phase 2 comes in," I replied, opening my laptop to display a presentation I had prepared. "Michael has been investigating Craig's financial activities over the past year. What we've found raises serious concerns about his fiduciary responsibility to the company." Michael distributed folders containing detailed reports. "Craig has made several decisions that could be considered breaches of his duty as CEO. The most concerning is his use of company resources to cover personal investment losses." "Are we talking about legal action against your own son?" Robert asked gently. I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of that question settling heavily on my shoulders. "I hope it doesn't come to that. My goal is to save Innotech, not destroy Craig. But he needs to understand there are consequences to his actions." James reviewed the documents thoughtfully. "So the strategy is two-pronged: block the GlobeTech deal using the bylaws, then present our alternative offer as a better solution for all stakeholders." "Exactly," I confirmed. "And we need to move quickly. The GlobeTech deal is set to close on Friday." "What about the board?" Sophia asked. "Even with your vote and the employee representatives, Craig still has influence over several members. That's why I've spent the last week speaking individually with each board member," I said. "Once they understood the full implications of the GlobeTech deal, particularly the likely layoffs and potential client impacts, most expressed serious concerns. They just needed someone to offer an alternative." We spent the rest of the day refining our strategy and preparing for an emergency board meeting I had called for Wednesday morning. By the time we finished, it was past 7 p.m. As everyone gathered their belongings to leave, James pulled me aside. "Charlotte, I have to say, Thomas would be incredibly proud of what you're doing." "I hope so," I said, emotion threatening to overwhelm me for the first time that day. "This isn't how I envisioned spending my retirement." James chuckled. "You were never meant for a quiet retirement, Charlotte. Thomas knew that too. It's why he put those provisions in the bylaws. He knew if push came to shove, you'd fight for what's right." After everyone left, I stayed behind with Michael to address one final personal concern. "Craig threatened my living situation," I explained. "The apartment is company property, and he implied I'd be evicted once the GlobeTech deal closed." Michael frowned. "That's another example of his overreach. According to the terms Thomas established, your right to that apartment is guaranteed for your lifetime, regardless of any change in company ownership. Can you make sure that's documented clearly? I don't want personal concerns to distract from the larger issue of saving Innotech." "Of course," he assured me. "And Charlotte, are you prepared for how Craig might react when he realizes what you've done? This won't be easy for him to accept." I gathered my coat, feeling the weight of responsibility Thomas had silently entrusted to me. Craig needs to learn the same lesson Thomas taught me early in our marriage. True success isn't measured by wealth or status, but by the positive impact you have on others' lives. If stopping this sale is the first step in teaching him that, then so be it. As I left the office, my phone pinged with a notification. It was another Instagram post from Melissa, a photo of designer luggage with the caption, "Packing for our post-deal celebration. Milan. Here we come. Success couple." living the dream. They were so confident in their plan, so certain nothing could stop them. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I received a call from an unexpected source, Amanda Delaney, GlobeTech's chief counsel. "Mrs. Wilson," she began without preamble, "I understand you have concerns about the acquisition of Innotech Solutions. I'm surprised Craig mentioned my concerns to you." I replied carefully. "He didn't," she said. "But my team discovered the bylaw provisions requiring unanimous board approval during our due diligence. When I questioned him about your potential opposition, he assured me you would fall in line." I couldn't help but smile at Craig's overconfidence. "I'm afraid my son misunderstood my position." "So it seems," Amanda said, her tone professional, but with an undercurrent of irritation. "Mrs. Wilson, I'll be direct. GlobeTech has invested significant resources in this acquisition process. If you're planning to block the sale, we would appreciate knowing now, rather than at the 11th hour. I appreciate your directness, Ms. Delaney. Yes, I intend to vote against the sale at tomorrow's board meeting, and I have reason to believe other board members will join me." There was a pause. "I see. And may I ask why you oppose the transaction? The terms are quite generous." "Generous to my son, perhaps with his guaranteed executive position. Not so generous to the company's valuation, its employees, or its clients." Another pause, longer this time. "I understand your concerns. Would you be open to discussing amendments to the terms that might address some of these issues?" I would have been, had Craig involved me from the beginning. At this point, I believe Innotech's interests would be better served by remaining independent or seeking a more aligned partnership. "Like with SecureSoft?" Amanda asked sharply. "We've heard rumors." So GlobeTech had their own sources of information. Interesting. "I can't comment on specific alternatives at this time," I said, "but I want to be transparent about my intention to vote against the current proposal." "Very well," Amanda replied, her tone cooling. "Thank you for your candor, Mrs. Wilson. GlobeTech will reevaluate its position accordingly." After hanging up, I immediately called Michael to update him on this development. GlobeTech knows about the bylaws, and suspects were talking to SecureSoft. "That's actually good news," Michael said. "It means they're taking the threat seriously. Craig can't dismiss your opposition as empty anymore." Sure enough, my phone rang again 10 minutes later. Craig's name flashed on the screen. "Mom," he began, his voice tightly controlled. "I just got a very concerning call from GlobeTech. What exactly did you say to their counsel?" "The truth," I replied simply, "that I intend to vote against the sale." "This is a $50 million deal," Craig exploded. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with? A deal that undervalues Innotech by at least 40%, eliminates most of our employees' jobs, and betrays our clients' trust. Yes, I understand exactly what I'm interfering with." "You've been retired for 2 years," Craig said dismissively. "You have no idea what the current market valuation should be. I may be retired, but I'm not oblivious. SecureSoft offered $70 million just last year, which you rejected, without even bringing it to the board." There was a telling silence. "How did you know about that?" "I have my sources," I said. "Just as I know about the cryptocurrency investments you covered with company funds and the personal expenses you've been running through corporate accounts." "You're spying on me." His voice rose in disbelief. "I'm doing my job as a board member, Craig. The job your father entrusted me with when he structured the company's succession." "This is unbelievable," Craig muttered. "My own mother sabotaging my future, out of some misplaced loyalty to Dad's outdated business model. "This isn't about loyalty to your father," I corrected him. "It's about responsibility to the company we built and the people who depend on it." "Save the sentimental speech," Craig snapped. "The emergency board meeting tomorrow is canceled. I need time to address these issues with GlobeTech." "The meeting will proceed as scheduled," I said firmly. "As per Section 7.3 of the bylaws, once called by a qualifying board member, an emergency session can only be canceled by majority vote of the board itself." Another silence, this one seething with frustration. Craig clearly hadn't expected me to know the bylaws in such detail. "Fine," he finally said. "Have your meeting. It won't change anything. I'll find a way to make this deal happen, with or without your approval." "We'll see," I replied. "Oh, and Craig, you might want to reconsider your Milan trip. I imagine GlobeTech and the board will have questions that require your presence here." He hung up without another word. I set down my phone mentally, preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. The emergency board meeting would be challenging, potentially even ugly, but necessary. Inotech's future hung in the balance, and with it, Thomas's legacy and the livelihoods of hundreds of employees. Craig had underestimated me, dismissed me as a sentimental old woman clinging to the past. Tomorrow, he would discover just how wrong he was. The Inotech boardroom was tensely silent as I entered at precisely 9 a.m. on Wednesday. The long mahogany table selected by Thomas years ago was surrounded by the 12 board members. Craig sat at the head, looking uncharacteristically disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting a sleepless night. Sophia was to his right, her expression carefully neutral, as she arranged financial documents before her. I took my designated seat near the middle of the table, nodding greetings to the other members. Most returned my nod, though a few Craig's business school friends he had appointed averted their gaze. "Now that we're all here," Craig began, forcing authority into his voice, "I've called this emergency meeting to address some concerns about the pending acquisition by GlobeTech." "Actually," I interjected calmly, "I called this meeting, as the minutes will reflect, to address not just concerns, but serious problems with both the proposed sale and recent management decisions." Craig's jaw tightened. "Fine. Since my mother is so eager to take the floor, let's hear these alleged problems." I opened my portfolio, removing copies of a comprehensive report Michael and I had prepared. As I distributed them to each board member, I began my presentation. For the past 2 years, I've respected Craig's position as CEO and majority shareholder. I've remained largely silent as he made changes to the company Thomas and I built. Some of these changes were perhaps necessary adaptations to a changing market. Others, however, have undermined Inotech's core strengths and values. I activated the presentation screen, displaying a series of financial graphs. These charts show Inotech's performance over the past 5 years. Note the stability in growth and profitability during Thomas's leadership, followed by the erratic performance since. Craig interrupted. "Disruption sometimes looks like instability to those resistant to change. We've been positioning Inotech for long-term growth by selling it to GlobeTech at a fraction of its value." I countered, advancing to the next slide, showing comparative valuations. This analysis, prepared by independent financial consultants, demonstrates that the proposed sale price of $50 million is between 35 and 45% below market value. Murmurs circulated around the table as board members examined the figures in their reports. Furthermore, I continued, Globetech's acquisition history shows a clear pattern. I displayed a chart of Globetech's previous acquisitions and their subsequent fates. Within 2 years of acquisition, an average of 78% of employees are terminated, and the acquired companies effectively cease to exist as distinct entities. Craig stood abruptly. This is pure speculation and fear-mongering. Globetech has provided assurances about employee retention, verbal assurances not reflected in the written terms, I noted. Sophia, would you please address the financial implications of the proposed sale? Sophia hesitated, glancing at Craig before straightening her shoulders. The financial analysis in your reports is accurate. The offered price significantly undervalues Innotech's assets, particularly our intellectual property and client relationships. Additionally, she paused, visibly uncomfortable. Go on, I encouraged. Additionally, there are concerning patterns in recent corporate expenditures that require explanation. She slid a separate document across the table to each board member. These records show substantial corporate funds used for what appear to be personal expenses and investments. Craig's face flushed deep red. Those were strategic investments on behalf of the company. Personal cryptocurrency trading and luxury expenses are hardly corporate strategy, Sophia replied, finding her courage. As CFO, I've raised these concerns repeatedly in private, but they've been dismissed. The boardroom erupted in confused questions and demands for explanation. Craig attempted to regain control, banging his hand on the table. Enough! This meeting was supposed to be about the Globetech acquisition, not a witch hunt against me. They're connected, I said, clearly cutting through the noise. Your rush to sell Innotech at a discounted price coincides with significant personal financial pressures created by failed investments and excessive spending. That's ridiculous, Craig sputtered, but his denial lacked conviction. I moved to the critical part of my presentation. Beyond these concerns, there's a fundamental legal issue with the proposed sale. According to Section 12.5 of Innotech's corporate bylaws, any sale of the company or substantial transfer of assets requires unanimous board approval. I nodded to Michael, who had been waiting outside. He entered with additional legal documents, which he distributed. Michael Harris, our corporate counsel since Innotech's founding, will explain this provision. Michael addressed the board with the gravitas of his 40 years in corporate law. Thomas Wilson added this provision 5 years ago, with full board approval at that time. It was designed specifically to prevent hasty or ill-considered sales that might threaten the company's long-term mission and employee welfare. Craig shook his head in disbelief. I was never informed of this provision. It's in the bylaws you signed when accepting the CEO position, Michael replied. Page 47, paragraph 3. Your signature acknowledges receipt and understanding of all provisions. The room fell silent as the legal reality sank in. Craig had been outmaneuvered by provisions his father had put in place years earlier. So, what exactly are you proposing, Charlotte? Asked Douglas Freeman, one of the longest-serving board members and a friend of Thomas. Simply blocking the sale leaves us where we were before with the same challenges. I'm proposing an alternative, I said, nodding to my assistant, who had been waiting outside. She opened the door to admit James Reynolds. Craig's eyes widened in recognition. What is he doing here? This is a confidential board meeting. Mr. Reynolds is here at my invitation. I explained to present an alternative acquisition offer from SecureSoft. For the next 30 minutes, James outlined SecureSoft's proposal, $78 million for Innotech, maintaining the company as a distinct division, retaining at least 90% of employees with guaranteed positions for 2 years, and continuing the innovation pipeline Thomas had established. Additionally, James concluded, we would welcome Craig's continued involvement in a leadership role focused on his strengths in marketing and business development, though ultimate executive authority would transfer to our existing management structure. The contrast with Globetech's offer was stark and compelling. Even Craig's allies on the board looked interested in this superior deal. Craig, however, was fuming. This is a setup. You've been planning this behind my back for weeks. I've been protecting Innotech's future, I corrected him. Something you were willing to sacrifice for personal gain. You have no right. I have every right, I interrupted firmly. As a board member, as a founder of this company, and as someone who still believes in what Innotech stands for. Douglas cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough to warrant serious consideration of both options. I move that we formally reject the Globetech offer and enter exclusive negotiations with SecureSoft for a period of 30 days. I second the motion, said Janet Parker, another longtime board member. All in favor? Douglas asked. One by one, hands raised around the table. Even Craig's appointed members, seeing the writing on the wall, voted in support. Only Craig himself abstained, his expression a mixture of shock and rage. The motion carries, Douglas announced. Craig, as CEO, you'll need to inform Globetech of our decision immediately. Craig stood abruptly. This isn't over. I still hold 75% of this company's shares, which gives you significant influence, but not unlimited power. Michael reminded him gently. The corporate structure your father established has checks and balances for a reason. And speaking of checks and balances, Sophia added, the board should address the financial irregularities I've identified. Standard procedure would be to suspend access to corporate accounts pending investigation. Craig's face paled. You can't be serious. I need those accounts for the Milan trip. Everything's booked and paid for. I'm afraid the company can't fund personal vacations during a financial investigation, Sophia said, her professional demeanor firmly in place. Any legitimate business expenses will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. This is insane, Craig muttered, gathering his papers. My own mother and our so-called loyal employees staging a coup. It's not a coup, Craig, I said quietly. It's governance. Something you should have taken more seriously. Without another word, Craig stormed out of the boardroom. The remaining board members looked to me, some with newfound respect, others still processing the dramatic turn of events. Thank you all for your thoughtful consideration today, I said, gathering my materials. I believe we've taken the first step toward securing Innotech's future in a way that honors its past while embracing positive change. As the meeting adjourned, James approached me. That went even better than we anticipated. Craig didn't have a leg to stand on once the legal requirements were made clear. He's still my son, I said softly, and he's hurting right now, even if it's largely self-inflicted. This isn't a victory I take pleasure in. James nodded understandingly. What do you think he'll do next? I sighed, watching through the glass walls as Craig argued heatedly with his assistant in the hallway. Knowing Craig, he'll try to find a way to salvage his pride. Right now, that probably means going ahead with the Milan trip to maintain appearances, even if the company isn't paying for it. And after that, that will depend on whether this experience teaches him humility or just feeds his resentment. I gathered my purse, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years. Either way, Innotech will continue, and Thomas's legacy is secure. That's what matters most. As I left the Innotech offices, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Just received word that Craig has already contacted Globetech to terminate negotiations. They're not happy, but legally, there's nothing they can do. Phase 1, complete. I smiled sadly. Phase 1, indeed. Saving the company had been my primary goal, but helping my son become the man Thomas had hoped he would be, that was a longer-term project, one that would require patience, wisdom, and love. For now, though, Craig and Melissa were about to learn a difficult lesson about financial reality when they arrived in Milan. Sometimes, the most effective teaching comes through natural consequences. 3 days later, I was enjoying a quiet morning coffee in my apartment when my phone rang. The international number told me what I had been expecting had finally happened. Craig and Melissa had arrived in Milan. "Hello, Craig," I answered calmly. "What have you done?" His voice was a mixture of panic and fury. "My cards are all being declined. The hotel is threatening to call the police if we don't provide valid payment." I took a sip of coffee before responding. "I haven't done anything, Craig. The board voted to suspend access to corporate accounts pending a financial investigation. Sophia would have explained this. These are my personal cards," he protested. "Cards linked to accounts funded by improper transfers from corporate resources," I clarified. "The forensic accountants have been quite thorough." In the background, I could hear Melissa's high-pitched complaints and the sounds of a busy hotel lobby. "We're stranded in Milan with barely enough cash for a day or two," Craig said, his voice dropping. "The Four Seasons is demanding payment up front or we have to leave." "I'm sorry you're in a difficult situation," I said, genuinely meaning it despite everything. "Perhaps this is an opportunity to practice more careful financial planning." "Is this funny to you?" Craig demanded. "Some kind of twisted revenge?" "Not at all," I replied seriously. "This is simply the consequence of choices you made, Craig. You chose to misuse company funds. You chose to pursue a self-serving deal with Globetech. You chose to tell your mother she was a burden and would have to worry about paying rent." There was a long pause, punctuated by Melissa's increasingly agitated voice in the background. "So what am I supposed to do now?" Craig finally asked, his tone slightly subdued. "You have options," I said. "You could use whatever personal funds you legitimately have to secure more modest accommodations. You could contact the American Embassy if you're truly without resources. Or you could return home and begin working with the board to resolve these issues professionally." "And what about the SecureSoft deal? Is that still happening?" "The board is proceeding with exclusive negotiations. Yes, James has made a very fair offer, including a position for you if you want it." "A demotion," Craig said bitterly. "A role aligned with your actual skills and experience," I corrected. "You're excellent at marketing and business development, Craig. You're just not ready for CEO responsibilities yet. Your father knew that, which is why he put those provisions in the bylaws. Dad never trusted me to run the company properly, did he?" The question held more hurt than anger. "He trusted that you had potential," I said gently. "But he also knew you needed guardrails while you developed the wisdom to match your ambition." In the background, I heard Melissa shouting, "Just tell her to wire us money for God's sake. This is humiliating." "Craig," I continued, "I'll make you an offer. I'll personally wire enough money for economy flights home and 2 nights at a modest hotel. Not as a loan from Innotech, but from me to my son. What you do with that offer is your choice." There was a long silence. "And if I accept, then we start rebuilding both the company and our relationship." Another pause. "Fine, send the money. But this doesn't change how I feel about what you did." "I wouldn't expect it to not yet," I replied. "Text me the hotel information and I'll make the arrangements." After ending the call, I sat quietly for several minutes, contemplating the complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the company was saved, sadness at the rift with my son, hope that this could be a turning point. My phone pinged with Craig's text containing the hotel details. Moments later, another ping brought a message from Sophia. "Board unanimously approved preliminary terms with SecureSoft. Moving to final contract phase." Thought you'd want to know. Everything was proceeding as planned, yet I felt no triumph, only a weary sense of having done what was necessary. Thomas would have understood that feeling perfectly. I made the arrangements for Craig and Melissa's modest accommodations and flights home, then called James to check on the SecureSoft negotiations. "It's all moving smoothly," he assured me. "The teams are working well together, and we've already identified several exciting synergies between our technologies." "And the employees, how are they taking the news?" "Relief mostly," James said. After months of uncertainty under Craig's leadership and rumors of the Globe Tech sale, knowing their jobs are secure with a company that values their work has lifted a huge weight. "What about the innovation pipeline Thomas started?" "We're not just continuing it, we're expanding it." Thomas was ahead of his time with that program. "We've been trying to implement something similar at SecureSoft for years." The conversation left me feeling more confident about Innotech's future. Perhaps this acquisition, unlike the one Craig had pursued, would truly honor what Thomas and I had built while allowing it to evolve naturally. Later that evening, I received a brief text from Craig. "Flights booked for day after tomorrow. We'll let you know when we land." No, thank you, no acknowledgement of the help, but at least communication hadn't completely broken down. 3 days later, I was in the midst of a meeting with James and the transition team when my phone buzzed with a message. "Landed, heading home. Don't contact me for a few days." I excused myself briefly to respond. "I understand. Take the time you need. I'm here when you're ready to talk." 2 weeks passed with no word from Craig. In that time, the SecureSoft acquisition moved forward steadily. The board approved the final terms. The contracts were signed, and the public announcement was met with approval from industry analysts who praised the strategic fit between the companies. Through it all, I maintained my role as advisor to the transition team, helping to preserve the best aspects of Innotech's culture while embracing positive changes from SecureSoft. My knowledge of the company's history and client relationships proved invaluable, confirming what Thomas had always said about the importance of institutional memory. Finally, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I opened it to find Craig standing alone, looking more humble than I had seen him in years. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside, noting the absence of his usual polished appearance. He was dressed casually, his hair unstyled, and most tellingly, without the expensive watch he usually flaunted. "Would you like some coffee?" I offered. He nodded, following me to the kitchen, where he sat at the small table Thomas and I had shared countless meals at over the years. "Melissa left," he said abruptly as I prepared the coffee. "Said she didn't sign up for a downgrade in lifestyle." I paused, taking in this information. "I'm sorry, Craig," he shrugged. "Turns out she was more interested in what I could provide than who I am." Pretty clear once the fancy credit cards stopped working. I placed a mug of coffee before him, sitting down across the table. That must be painful to realize. Not as painful as realizing what I almost did to Dad's company. He stared into his coffee. I've had a lot of time to think these past 2 weeks. About Innotech, about you and Dad, about the kind of person I've become. I remained silent, letting him speak. I was so focused on appearing successful that I lost sight of what actual success looks like. Dad never cared about impressing people or living some Instagram-worthy lifestyle. No, I agreed. He measured success by the problems we solved, the people we employed, the difference we made. Craig looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I really messed up, didn't I? Not just with the GlobeTech deal, but with everything. The company, the finances, how I treated you. Yes, I said gently, you did. But acknowledging that is the first step toward making things right. Is it too late? He asked, vulnerability replacing his usual confident facade. The SecureSoft deal is done. My reputation in the industry is probably trashed. It's never too late to change direction, Craig. SecureSoft has still offered you a position. Different from CEO, yes, but a role where you could contribute and rebuild. James called me yesterday, Craig admitted. Offered me the head of business development position. Said you had suggested it. I nodded. It's where your talents truly lie. You've always had a gift for building relationships and spotting market opportunities. You just needed more experience before taking on full leadership responsibilities. Like Dad tried to tell me, Craig said ruefully. I was too arrogant to listen. Thomas believed in your potential, I told him. He just knew you needed time to develop wisdom, along with your skills. It's why he structured the company the way he did with those provisions I used to block the GlobeTech sale. He was protecting me from myself, Craig said softly. And so were you. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of understanding between us. I don't know what to do about my apartment, Craig finally said. Without the CEO salary and with my accounts frozen during the investigation, I can't afford the Beacon Hill place. I had anticipated this concern. I have a suggestion if you're willing to hear it. Craig nodded. The apartment you're living in is technically still an Innotech asset, soon to be transferred to SecureSoft. I've spoken with James, and we've arranged to remove it from the acquisition assets. I'm purchasing it outright. You're buying my apartment? Craig asked, confused. Not exactly. I'm buying it to give to you. A place to live while you rebuild your career and financial stability. No strings attached. Craig stared at me in disbelief. After everything I did, after how I treated you, why would you do that? Because you're my son, I said simply. And because beneath the person you've been pretending to be, I still see glimpses of the man your father and I raised you to be. Craig's eyes filled with tears, something I hadn't seen since he was a child. I don't deserve your help. It's not about deserving Craig. It's about family. Real family, not the performance of perfect lives that you and Melissa were trying to maintain. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. I'll take the job at SecureSoft. And I'll talk to the financial investigators. Tell them everything they need to know to sort out the accounts. That's a good start, I encouraged him. The road back won't be easy or quick, but it is possible. Will you help me? He asked, sounding more like my son than he had in years. I don't mean financially, but I could use your guidance. Like when I was younger, and you and Dad would help me work through problems. Of course I will, I promised. That's what mothers do. Craig managed a small, genuine smile. I'm beginning to understand what Dad always said about you being the real strength behind Innotech. He was right. 6 months later, I stood at the window of my apartment, watching snowflakes gently fall over Boston. The view included the Innotech, now Innotech SecureSoft, building its lights glowing warmly in the early winter dusk. The merger had proceeded smoothly, with minimal disruption to employees or clients. James had kept his promises, maintaining the company culture while strategically integrating the complementary technologies. The innovation pipeline Thomas had created was flourishing under the combined resources of both companies, already yielding promising new security solutions. Craig had surprised many, including himself, perhaps by excelling in his role as head of business development. Free from the pressure of overall company leadership, he focused on his natural strengths in relationship building and market strategy. His knowledge of Innotech's history and client base, combined with a new humility about his own limitations, made him valuable during the transition. The financial investigation had completed 3 months earlier. Craig had cooperated fully, repaying misappropriated funds through a structured payment plan that would take years to complete. It was a constant reminder of his past mistakes, but also an opportunity to demonstrate his commitment to making amends. My own role had evolved as well. While officially retired, I served as a special advisor to the executive team, particularly on matters involving long-standing clients and company heritage. It was fulfilling work that kept me connected to the company Thomas and I had built while allowing the next generation to lead. My phone rang, interrupting my reflections. It was Craig. "Mom, are you still up for dinner tonight? There's someone I'd like you to meet." "Of course," I replied. "The reservation's at 7. Who am I meeting?" "Her name is Laura," Craig said, a new warmth in his voice. "She's a client relations manager I met during the merger. She's different from Melissa, grounded, intelligent kind." "She sounds lovely," I said, genuinely pleased to hear happiness in my son's voice again. "I look forward to meeting her. Just so you know," Craig added with a touch of humor, "she drives a 10-year-old Honda and thinks Instagram is a waste of time. Dad would have approved." I laughed. He certainly would have. After ending the call, I returned to the window, watching the snow transform the city. The past 6 months had brought healing I hadn't dared hope for. Craig was slowly becoming the man Thomas and I had always believed he could be, learning from his mistakes rather than being defined by them. The apartment I had purchased for him remained in my name, for now part of our agreement that he would earn back independence through demonstrated responsibility. He had accepted this arrangement with a newfound grace, understanding it as an expression of love rather than control. As for Innotech, Thomas's legacy continued transformed, but not diminished. The company we had started in our garage 35 years ago was now helping secure digital assets for organizations worldwide, employing hundreds of people in meaningful work. The name we had chosen together still adorned the building, now paired with SecureSoft, but not overshadowed by it. Sometimes I imagine Thomas watching over all of this, the company's evolution, Craig's painful but necessary growth, my own unexpected return to influence. I could almost hear his gentle laugh, see the pride in his eyes at how things had unfolded. That evening, as I prepared for dinner, I paused before the photo of Thomas and me at Innotech's 20th anniversary celebration. We looked happy, accomplished, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead for our family and company. "We did it, Thomas," I whispered to his smiling image. "Not the way we planned, but maybe the way it needed to be." As I left for the restaurant, I reflected on the journey of the past months. From hearing my son callously tell me I was a burden and would need to worry about paying rent, to watching him rebuild himself into someone worthy of the legacy he had nearly destroyed. From fearing Inotech would be dismantled by Globetech to seeing it flourish in its new incarnation with SecureSoft. Life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes the greatest power comes not from controlling everything, but from knowing when to let go and when to stand firm. The company Thomas and I built would continue to thrive, but the most valuable legacy we leave behind isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in lessons learned and relationships healed. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you love for what was right, even when it was painful? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If my journey has resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with others who might find encouragement in it. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Thank you for walking this path with me today. And remember that sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when we feel most vulnerable.